Revenue collection. This video is brought to you by Unacademy in association with YarnCentral.com. We already know the company had become the Diwan of Bengal by 1765 after winning the Battle of Buxar. Now, what exactly did a Diwan mean? During the Mughal period, the zamindars or the landlords or the people who owned the land, they actually were responsible for collecting the land revenues. And this was monitored by divans or representatives of the Mughal emperor. The divans kept the zamindars at check, saw to it that the zamindars were not too lax, not too stringent. So the divans were the chief financial administrator of the locality. So let us understand the revenue system here. We had the ruler whose representative was the divan of the respective territory, and who supervised, the divan supervised over the zamindar who was responsible for collecting the revenue from a tenant or the peasant who paid a certain rent to the zamindar. So the peasant here cultivated the land, did all the hard work, and made a living out of it. But since he was not the owner of the land, he had to pay a certain rent to the zamindar, who just sat there, collected the revenues, and reported to the divan. The divan saw to it that the zamindar worked efficiently, and then divan reported to the ruler. So that's how the system actually worked. Now, when the company became the chief financial administrator of the area, that is Bengal in this case, it had to think of administering the land and organizing its revenue resources. But this had to be done in a way that could yield enough revenue to meet the growing expenses of the company. Being an alien power, the company saw to it that it had to pacify those who were currently or previously in a certain local power, and they had to be controlled, not to be eliminated. Because the company had to ensure that it could buy whatever the products it needed and sell whatever it wanted. So the company's primary objectives were to colonize countryside, to redefine the rights of people, to produce the crops it wanted. The company primarily saw itself as a trading company. So its effort always remained to increase the revenue as much as it could and buy fine cotton and silk as cheaply as possible. Before it became the Diwan, that is before 1765, the company purchased goods by importing gold and silver from Britain. But now it did not have to do so. It could purchase the goods by the revenue collected from Bengal itself. So earlier, it could buy goods by only importing gold and silver from Britain. Now it could buy goods from the revenue collected from Bengal. But as soon as it became the Diwan, the company mismanaged a lot of things. It forced the artisans to sell them goods at cheap prices. So, as a result of which, the artisanal production decreased. Peasants were forced to pay huge rents, so the cultivation also collapsed. Then there was also the famine of 1770, which we had discussed in earlier videos. Now that the economy was in ruins, the company was uncertain of its revenues. So most of the company's officials decided that agriculture had to be improved. So after 2 decades, the company finally introduced what was known as the Permanent Settlement Act. Permanent. This was introduced in 1793 by Lord Cornwallis. This picture, this man right here, is Lord Cornwallis. So let us look at what the permanent settlement was all about. The basic revenue system remained the same. There was a zamindar who collected the taxes, and there was a peasant who paid a certain rent to cultivate the crops in the zamindar's land. All the rajas and the talukdars were the zamindar in this case, the local rajas. Rajas meaning local rulers and talukdars meaning landlords. So, according to the permanent settlement, the zamindar had to pay a fixed revenue to the company. Fixed meaning this would not be increased even in the future. So the company felt that this would ensure a regular flow of revenue for the company. And this would also benefit the zamindar how? That this would encourage the zamindar to invest more in improving the land. And this revenue demand of the state would not be increased. So the zamindar would obviously eventually benefit from the increased production of the land, because if he invested more, so he would get a better quality of crop, so he would get a better revenue, but he would have to pay only a certain amount of that revenue to the company. So it was a win-win situation for the zamindars and the company. So how did this become a problem? How did the permanent settlement fail? Now let us discuss that for a while. The company officials discovered that the zamindars were not investing in the improvement of the land, and the fixed revenue rate even was so high that the zamindars were unable to pay it. And anyone who failed to pay the revenue lost his zamindari. So numerous zamindaris were sold off at auctions organized by the company. So by the first decade of the 19th century, in the 1800s, in the early 1800s, the situation, however, changed. In the early 1800s, the prices in the market rose and the cultivation slowly expanded. But the problem, this meant that there was an increase in revenue for the zamindars, but no gain for the company. So the company saw this as a threat. The zamindars had no interest in improving their lands. They saw it as an opportunity. The ones who still had their land saw it as an opportunity to earn without the trouble and risk of investment. As long as they could give the land to tenants and get rent, they were not interested in improving the land. In all this focus on the higher hierarchies of the system, that is the zamindars and the company, we completely forgot about the peasants. What about the peasants? What did they have to go through? The peasants found the system highly oppressive. The rent he had to pay was too high. So he often had to lend money from the money lenders, and they were not easy people to handle. Now, if he failed to pay the rent, he was evicted from his land. And when this happened, imagine what a person who had cultivated in the same land for generations would feel. He would obviously feel extremely oppressed. So the peasants were the real loser here. So, on that note, in the next video, we'll be talking about what was the new system devised by the company and what were the implications of the new system.